Okay, hello everybody, and welcome back to the Azure podcast. This is episode number 412, and this is being recorded on February 16th. And today we've actually got some special guests from the Azure Database for Postgres team. We'll get to them in a few minutes, but before we get to them, I'm joined. This is Evan, and I've got Russell, Kale, and Sajit here today, obviously, as well as our special guests. So let's get to the news, y'all. Who wants to go first?
I can get started. There were a couple of items that I put in there. One is about the M series virtual machines that we have, which are the memory intensive virtual machines that are offered on Azure.
Mm-hmm.
And those typically, the focus is on memory and CPU, but not so much on I/O. But what they have added now is the capability of these kind of VMs to burst the I/O temporarily. So if you think about it, when the machine's booting up, you want it to come up fast. You don't want, that's the short amount of time where you have a lot of I/O, and then you're running your database in memory or whatever, and everything's, you don't really use the I/O. So they've enabled this burst I/O capability, which gives you like, a little bit of extra IOPS for short periods of time for these unforeseen times when the VM requires additional I/O, without you having to just buy a dedicated IOPS for the entire VM. So that I thought that was a nice feature. And the other one, which I'm really excited to learn about, is Azure Monitor now can use machine learning to figure out when to auto scale your virtual machine scale sets. So it can learn the history of how how your CPU and your VMs get used, and then it proactively will scale up and scale down the the number of machines in your scale set to meet that demand. So I thought that was a nice touch for VMSS.
Yeah, I hear about that. I've heard that feature request a lot from customers. Like, I turn these things up every day. Why can't you? Why do I have to tell you that I'm going to do it? You tell me. So great.
Very nice. Yeah, a couple that caught my eye in my sort of area, the new Azure Tables extension for Azure Functions. So this is a NuGet package that just makes it a lot easier to integrate between functions and various different tables APIs. So now supports the Cosmos DB tables API and storage tables using identity-based connections. So that's a NuGet package you can just include and get using in public preview. And the other one was Azure API management now supporting private link in different SKUs. So previously it was available for developer and premium, but now it's across all SKUs out there in public preview. So that allows you to secure to clients running within your VNet. So that's a nice little addition.
I got two here today. The first one is an event. So the first ever Azure HPC and AI Day. So pretty cool event that's happening here. And I believe this is on the 24th and 25th of February. If you can't make it in person, I think there is actually an in-person one here, but they're also broadcast on LinkedIn. So basically you can register up here, take a look at this. There's some swag and a bunch of different topics. There's partners and customers who are presenting in these topical areas. So pretty cool stuff. And then the second one was around this virtual machine availability, this thing called Project Flash. So it's a pretty interesting write-up if you haven't been tuned into this. So Flash was a internal project in Azure Engineering for VM availability, kind of monitoring and things like that on a bigger scale, right? So more features to be able to diagnose things when things go wrong with your VMs. Bunch of different new monitoring options for VMs at scale. In Azure Monitor, there's some new things there as well. So this is kind of a collection of some of those things into this thing called Project Flash to basically help you diagnose your VM availability.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I've been using Project Flash with a couple of my customers, and it's great to have that real-time data. That's one of the big questions. The only other thing that I wanted to share, and we'll share this link because this is actually an infographic, so it probably doesn't come across great in the podcast. But we had the Jim Perrin from the CBL Mariner team come on I don't know, a month or so ago, and talking about, Linux supporting underlying Microsoft services. And one of the things we talked about is Linux is such a bigger thing in Azure these days than it was, in years past. And so we published an infographic that talks about some interesting statistics around. I'll just quote a couple and then we'll share it. But 60% of the Azure Marketplace images are Linux. Who would have ever guessed that, when we first launched this thing called Windows Azure many, many years ago? The tuned kernels versus just a random Linux kernel are 25% faster network throughput. And then I think we quoted this when the Mariner team was on here, but more than 50% of the VM cores in Azure, Red Dog even before Windows Azure, more than 50% of the cores in Azure are actually Linux. Right. Again, in some ways, it's a big testament to where we shifted as a company, but it's sort of where the industry has gone as well. So we'll share this link. There's some other interesting stats in there. So with that, so let's transition over to our guests. So we've got Prabhat Tripathi and Sunil Agarwal today here from the Azure Database for Postgres team. And like a lot of the relationships I have, it all started with me and them getting yelled at in a call somewhere. But so I thought I'd have them back to have a much happier conversation and talk about this product. So what is Azure Database for Postgres, and why do people want to use it? Why not? I mean, I'll ask the obvious question as an ex-SQL Server person. Why don't I just use SQL?
Yeah, Prabhat, you want me to take that, or you carry on?
So Evan, if you look at it, there's a lot of customers with the strong penetration of open source databases. They are tuned to Microsoft, but at the same time, the growth of Postgres, if you look at DB engine ranking, it has been phenomenal year over year. It is one of the top 3 growth databases overall. And with this rich ecosystem around extension and support and the capability of the database, along with the storage engine, it is very quickly becoming a default choice for customers outside Oracle and Postgres who wants to use open source version of databases. And it works really well with LAMP stack and various other stacks which community is developing, and at the same time our competitors are developing. So in terms of market growth, it is phenomenal. And customers are banking on that growth because it is similar, it is cost effective, correct? When they host Postgres or when Microsoft hosts Postgres against SQL, it's cost effective also. And the companies like Microsoft, Amazon, we are building and adding enterprise capabilities, like whether it is bring your own key, where you can have data encrypted at rest in transit, integration with Azure Active Directory. So what I'm trying to highlight, we are slowly building enterprise capabilities, which SQL is famous for. SQL is our flagship product, There's tens and thousands of customers running mission critical workload and really, really well. I think Postgres becomes a good alternative for them, which is little cheaper, at the same time performant with enterprise features.
So, I mean, in some ways, this sort of sounds like what you're describing is, and again, this was not planned, this is purely coincidence, but the Linux, numbers that we were talking about, this is sort of meeting customers where they are, but bringing in our deep experience with enterprise and the features that enterprises are listening and contributing back into that ecosystem at the end of the day.
Exactly. Right. And if you look at it, we have seen our attach rate with Linux services, with Kubernetes, significantly higher. So a lot of these customers are not hey, they are old school Microsoft customers. They are running everything on Microsoft. These are a bunch of open source customers. And with Postgres as an offering cloud, we are essentially attracting a lot of net new customers to Azure. And that is a big win for Microsoft and business and even community also.
And I think, Ivan, let me add a additional point to what Prabhat just said. Now, you think about, go back 5 to 10 years, okay? Enterprise workloads. They would go with Oracles and Sybase and SQL servers because there were trained DBAs who could do everything, like setting, the DR strategy and the HA strategy and everything else. And nobody could come to Postgres or MySQL, even though Postgres for sure had a lot of enterprise capabilities, as Prabhat is talking about. But the point was, if you were that business and you wanted to run your mission critical application on Postgres, you needed trained DBAs who could set everything up. And there were no people like that, right? Or few. What has happened with cloud vendors like Microsoft or Amazon or GCP bringing those services, open source services, as a managed service where they take
Oh, you don't
all
need to
these
do
things
it
out.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happens is now that the blocker that people had is gone. So they are a lot more open to running and confident, right? For example, I mean, if they don't have to worry about what backup is, how do we set up HA and things like that, and then things like BYOK, everything is being done as a managed service. So it has become very attractive from that
Right.
perspective, because a lot of these customers are not as cost conscious, because they want to make sure their application runs all the time, and that is that. And the last point I will add to that is this Postgres open source gives them a multi-cloud strategy, because if they're running on Amazon, they can easily migrate to GCP or migrate to Azure and things like that, right? So those are two additional points to think about.
And very good point, Sunil. And I would like to also add one thing which we have observed, Evan and Russell and everyone, like working with our customers. Postgres is becoming a strong attach in terms of SaaS plays. So customers like, say, they're the customer FUBAR, they will have thousands of their customers. And as their business grows, the Postgres and Postgres opportunity also grows with that. Now, for them, the managed service is a really tenable option because on the fly, they can create n number of Postgres, and manage them as and when their business is growing. So that is a very strong value prop. Without naming customers, we have tens of them, and they just really scale their business with Postgres because as their business grows, new customer comes, they just have an automation to make sure most Postgres are created for them.
Now, prior to today, we've had, I believe, Postgres marketplace offerings, right? Is that the way that traditionally customers have had to deploy Postgres in Azure?
So there were, but they were not full-blown Postgres offering to begin with, right? And most of the enterprise customers, they also required an extensive support model, which Postgres at Microsoft offers that. So the growth and the customer adoption wasn't that great. Yes, there were customers who were using it. I remember there was a clear DB version of MySQL way back, but the growth adoption wasn't there. But the moment Microsoft launched and Microsoft stood behind open source and open source community and launched Postgres and MySQL, I think the adoption with all of these enterprise and new generation companies just skyrocketed.
I see. So in this new service which you're about to tell us, the buck stops at Microsoft in terms of customers can call if there's any problem, and Microsoft will address that in some way. Is that the approach we're taking?
Yes, we are standing behind and supporting Postgres and open source community, absolutely.
Yeah, that actually takes us over to the next thing. So I think when I first met y'all, Azure Database for Postgres was a thing. It was out there. It was in use. But y'all recently went general availability with this thing called Flexible Server for it. What is Flexible, and why? Why as a customer, why would I care about Flexible? As a SKU.
Can you want to take this? I can go
Okay.
15 minutes on this topic.
No, okay. Yeah, no. Happy to take this call, take this question. So, as you know, that Azure first launched the managed Postgres in 2017. Prabhat, am I right?
It's been a
Somewhere?
while. Yeah.
On March 20, 2018, we
2008.
launched the first managed Postgres offering at Microsoft on Windows stack, and that's what we call single server. So
That's
it's roughly 4 years back, a little
4
less
years,
than
yeah.
4 years
He,
back.
he doesn't
So-
remember the day. It doesn't stick out in his memory at all.
No, so we launched that, and as Prabhat pointed out, it is written on Windows, and Postgres as a database was designed on Linux.
Yeah.
So if you think about the natural habitat for Postgres was Linux, and I think even you were talking like in the beginning, 50 or so % of our VMs are Linux based. So we wanted to bring the new generation, if you will, of Postgres onto Linux operating system, because it is a much simplified architecture with Linux. It just fits right in. So Flexible Server, the starting point was we wanted to bring the service on Linux with a simplified stack, right? And second thing that we brought with Flexible Server is all the learnings that we have had with customers on single server. Single server, as Prabhat is pointing out, March of 2018, so it's almost 4 years. So we have learned a ton hosting these customers. In fact, we learned a ton about open source databases as well because we were learning in the process. So we have brought in all those learnings and uh, and created a service we believe addresses most of the concerns that we have heard from customers, right? So that is the exciting part. So I know, as Prabhat said, he can talk 15 minutes, a conservative estimate from him. I mean, he can talk long, right? So I'll tell you a few things
45
which are,
minute, 30-minute show, guys, is what we're
yeah,
shooting
yeah.
for.
So we can talk about two. I'll just touch upon two things and let Prabhat talk about more. So the thing is that because we're running on Linux, it has simplified our architecture. And second thing is we were able to leverage a lot more capabilities from Azure because we were re-architecting this engine. So for example, we can co-locate your Postgres flexible server into the same availability zone. If you don't know what availability zone is, it means same data center in a layman term, in the same availability zone as your client here, which means you have a very low latency connection between your client and Postgres. So a lot of chatty applications, who were suffering if they are not co-located, are performing much better. And second goal, which was very important goal that we had, was, as Prabhat is pointing out, managed service. That's what people were looking for. But the problem sometimes customer faces, if I go to the managed service, I lose control. I lose performance, right? Because it is in my house, I can wire it the way I want it, right? So one of the goals, and this is where Prabhat's team, who leads the engineering team here, spend a lot of time in making out of the box performance very comparable to what you would get on a VM. So now think about this. If I was running on a VM, I'm stuck with the DBA kind of role and the setting of the backup, restore, all kinds of things. But what I was getting before was the performance,
Perfect. Yeah.
right? Now we have said you don't have to worry about that. You can bring your application as it is running on a VM and bring it to a flexible server, and you will get a very comparable performance. It is such a strong value proposition because that was the last hurdle that we were facing. So we did that, and then also what we have done is, this is the last point I'll make on this one, is Postgres provides a very rich set of configuration parameters. Now, as you know, some of those configuration parameters can be suicidal. I mean, you can set something up without realizing what this one is, and your application performance will go through the tank, right? So we have been very, very careful on what parameters we can expose in the managed service, because if they set those parameters in the wrong way, then the service goes down. The blame will be, hey, Microsoft, you're not managing the service well. So we have been very, very conservative. But in our process with single server, we learned that some of those server parameters are so critical for high-end workloads and DBAs, because it's like this, right? I mean, if they come to managed service and they can't do those things, they feel incomplete. Like, how
Yeah.
do I
Yeah.
tune it? So Prabhat and his team has done an excellent job in figuring out what are those extra parameters that are so critical to our customers. So we provided that. So basically what we have now is a managed Postgres in the form of flexible server that is performant, gives DBAs the comfort level that they can tune the way they want it. Right. So I think that's where I want to stop in terms of flexible server. I'll let Prabhat to add
I'll add a
some
few more,
trouble.
maybe Evan, for maybe 2-3 more minutes. So what Sunil just said about configuration parameters is spot on. But at the same time, we also invested what we call intelligent tuning of vacuum configuration, of various parameter configuration based on SKU size, based on workload. And these are the capabilities which we have launched with Flexible Server. So now the notion or the word flexible becomes really flexible. And it is in context, like if you look at customers, what we learn on single server, they sometimes want to stop their workload. They don't want to get billed for Postgres running 24/7. So we added capability like a start-stop. Now customer can stop their workload. They wanted sometime high throughput workload and sometime not. We added capability of burstable compute. So you can run Postgres on burstable compute. In my opinion, and based on my customer interaction, the number one capability which we have on Flexible Server, which is really flexible and helps customer, is the managed maintenance. So most of our customer in Azure, they get a notification saying that, okay, Microsoft will do a deployment at this time window and your application may go down. In single server, I do the same thing. I notify customers 72 hours in advance saying that at this time window, we'll do a deployment and expect some blip and your application will restart. What we did in Flexible Server, we said, I'm going to offer you, the customer, full control. So Evan, you can decide on your
maintenance window, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. You as a customer, you can decide that Saturday 3 a.m. works best for me, and you schedule the deployment and Microsoft Service Infrastructure will take care of it. Imagine something Saturday morning you got up and then you have an event, say somewhere in Europe where your database needs to be up. You can defer the maintenance, so you have full control.
Yeah, that's huge. We see that actually. That's a sort of a common request across a lot of services. You're putting some pressure on some of your peer service teams at that point. But
no, to me, this is a marquee feature because a lot of I talk to customers and customers really love it, and we want to extend it and make it really work for our customers. Sujit?
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering though. I mean, I appreciate what you just said about that notification to the customer, but ideally the customer shouldn't be notified at all, right? That anything is going. I mean, I'll be honest with you. When I get an email saying that my server is going down at this time, I get nervous. No matter how small that window is, because you know that there is going to be some period of time when you cannot serve requests in a timely manner, and with the expectation, I think these days is that there'll be a second server somewhere, right? That can take the load, and you start thinking about what's your disaster recovery story. What's the data replication? Am I going to lose any data? So I just wanted to know from you.
Very, very important, very valid, because enterprise will not want it. Correct. So like our team built what we call a zone resilient HA. So you have, say, Postgres in AZ1, you will have Postgres standby, hot standby in AZ2. We even have concept of a few other processes where we are able to replicate wall there so that we can resurrect anytime something goes wrong in terms of disaster recovery. Now, in terms of maintenance, Sujit, say a customer has primary and hot standby and they have multi-AZ zonal resilient capability. We'll make sure that database is always available for customer. Right? Imagine a case, secondary or hot standby got upgraded first. It has all the latest payload. And we do a seamless failover for customer from primary to hot standby. And then we go back and upgrade the old primary. We do all of that, okay? So we want to make sure customer workload really, there are things where we can absolutely do better. But these are, to me, it's a journey, and we have come up like a step change in Postgres at Microsoft doing all of this.
So if I'm, the question that kind of sort of comes to mind for me is, so let's say I'm a customer that jumped on this in March of 2018. I'm running, single server. I see this flexible server out there. I want to take advantage of all these cool capabilities. What's the migration path from single server to flex server? Is that, export and import? Is there a seamless migration? What's the story around that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question and a tough question, which is actually not making me sleep. I'll be very honest with you. So what we did, no, we have a solution also. I know it is a tough and challenging problem, but at the same time, we are in the process of actually. I think share that we are in the process of actually rolling out some capability where customers with database size, say less than 1 terabyte, we'll offer them a solution where, as part of our managed service offering itself, they can move from single server to flexible server.
Okay, so not there, but coming. You're working on it.
It's very quickly coming because it's already in private preview. A bunch of customers are using it, and it is essentially getting launched this week. So this is a scoop of information. I believe product will be okay if I'm share that, because I think it is okay. It's coming in few regions, less than 1 terabyte. But beyond 1 terabyte, there are a lot of challenges, correct, Evan? And just to help you understand the challenges. So say there's a big enterprise customers who have 10 terabyte of database, and this is a high throughput database with a lot of DDL changes happening on the source side. Yeah, I can take a dump of 10 terabyte and move it to Flexible Server. And 10 terabyte takes time. Just copy 2 terabyte from one laptop to the other laptop on a high wire. It will still take hours. I can move the data, but how do I make sure any incremental changes which are happening between the snapshot was created and now, they are also flowing through, right? And the technologies what we have, like logical replication, physical replication works really well. But in our case, we are running on Windows and Linux. So there are challenges with that. So we are looking into a logical replication as one option. And if you're looking into that, then we need to understand the nuance around what is supported and what isn't supported, and how can we work with community to make logical replication work better in scenarios like this. So Sunil, you want to add here?
No, I think you nailed it. So this is indeed the challenge, that it is size of data operation. Now, as Prabhat is pointing out, we are trying our best to do this migration online if possible. So for example, if you're a customer running with say 2 terabyte database, I'm just making an example. If I could do the backup and the restore on the flexible server now, that's a new target, but your production continues to run on the single server till then, so there is no downtime. And then we are also doing the sync, right? If the sync works, because it works in majority cases, but there are some schema limitations. Postgres cannot do logical replication. For example, if you do not have primary key, logical application will not work, right? Physical application will, things like that. So assuming those conditions are satisfied, then we can sync up. And once everything is caught up at
Flip
a
it over at
time,
that point.
you can switch it. So
Yeah.
that I think is the ideal case for us. And there are, like Prabhat is pointing out, there are gaps here and there, and we're trying to figure out how to close those gaps. But I think even the question that you have is absolutely important. This question gets asked every day. I'm running on single, flexible is so much better. I want to get there. And how do I get
Yeah.
there
You made too
without
good a product
impacting?
is the problem, right? You made it too
Right,
good and everybody wants to be there.
right. And yeah, so that's the problem.
Yeah, I was just wondering, PostgreSQL is a very popular open source database server. And I remember back in the Kubernetes days when we moved it to Azure, keeping the versions of the software that is in the open source in sync with what is on Azure has always been, a difficult thing to do. I'm just wondering how Postgres handles that on Azure. How do the users have an option to say, I want to upgrade this to version Y, or is that something that you just do seamlessly on the back end at some periodic interval so that you're not too far behind the downstream version?
Right.
So,
So let Prabhat carry on. I'll do from there.
so we right now support on Flexible Server Postgres 11, 12, and 13. Our intent and goal as Microsoft is the moment Postgres new version is released, within 3 months of that launch, I want that version to be available in Asia, period. We will do it, and I have full commitment from me and my team. I think that will happen. I think the bigger question, which my team is actually investing in as we speak, is the online upgrade. So if customer is running PG12 and PG14 is one which I just launched, how do I provide the online upgrade capability? Timeline to build that capability is still TBD, because I know we are working on it. It's in our roadmap. Timeline, I think once we feel comfortable that we are able to launch it seamlessly for our customers, we'll be launching it definitely sometime in next 1 year.
But right now, if you create a new database, you could say, I want this version, and you can create it.
You can say that.
I'm sorry, Sunil, you were saying something?
Yeah, no, I think the point is today, uh, um, the migration to a higher version is the size of data operation. It is like you spin up a new server, whether it is on flexible server or single server, you spin up a new server, which is on the target version that you want, and then you migrate the data. Almost the same kind of steps that you do for a migration from single to flex, with some changes, right? And that is not a good customer story. I mean, ideally what you want is you want to install a new VM, if you will, with a new Postgres 12 or 13 or 14 and attach the older version data files and log files to it, and then you just restart and everything is hunky dory, right? So that I think is the goal that Prabhat mentioned, and we are definitely going to deliver that by end of this year, because if we don't have that capability, adding new versions is not going to be helpful to the customers. How do I go to the? We have to make that path very easy, and that's what we are investing our time on. And then there's another nuance which is very important. Unlike SQL Server, where we went extreme care that there's a backward compatibility. You can take a SQL Server 2008 physical backup and restore on SQL Server 2018 without any worry, right? Open source databases traditionally have not been that methodical about that, right? So you cannot, in some cases, take. They're getting better. Don't get me wrong. So I cannot take a Postgres 9.6 physical backup and attach on 14 and assume everything will work fine. So there are things like that. So the question that you asked, Sujit, was, do we do automatically? No, we do not do automatic increase of the version. We customer has to choose. Yeah.
I just had one final question, and this one might be a little controversial, say, but like, so the managed Postgres is obviously there's like huge benefits there, right? Hence why it was created, why customers use it. What are the scenarios where someone would say, I can't use that. I need to run Postgres inside Kubernetes. I need to run it manually, all those things. If you can like help our listeners, like, is there like, a SQL Server would be like, oh, you can use SQL Server in the cloud, except for there's no SSIS and things like this. Like there was a bunch of other features, and over time, some of those got folded into Azure and things like that. But I'm just wondering for our listeners, like, when do they say, I can't use a managed, I have to use like bare metal?
Very good question. I'll take a very quick stab at it. This is more product question, but I want to give an engineering hat onto this one. The reason we put it flexible server, we said the VM is the isolation container boundary. I want to offer whatever a normal Postgres or a community Postgres, if you host it anywhere, will do as a managed service, period. Only reason customer may decide, hey, I want to run Postgres on a VM, is that maybe I haven't launched that capability or some capability. Like to give an example, maybe I'm a little behind on Postgres version, which I don't want to be. That's not my goal. I don't want to be. So from my vantage point, customers should not have a reason if they moved and run Postgres on a VM or on a AKS separately as a managed service, then maybe I need to go back to the drawing board and do things a little better somewhere, because that was not the intent of flexible server.
Right. And I think this is a good point. And I'll add two more points to that, Kale. Like Prabhat talked about the capabilities, but think about this. Today, we do not have the whole range of Azure VMs and storage available as flexible server managed service. So suppose you're looking M series. I think Sujit talked about M series VM, which very high memory. I mean, I can imagine there are very high end
Postgres
workloads.
instance.
Right. So one of the things Prabhat and team and we're all working together is how do we offer, right? So that will be one such example. Now, second example, which is I think is important, I think even maybe you mentioned there are so many extensions. Like a Postgres is a very rich database with a plugin model, right? So there are people who are developing extensions left and right, right? I don't have the count how many extensions are there, but some of those extensions are not secure, right? They have security things, right? I'm not suggesting anybody running those things even in their home environment or their on premise, but there may be business reasons they want to run that and they have somehow closed that loop from a security perspective. Okay. We will not run that extension in our even though there's a VM, but the point is if it can cause security things, right? So those could be some examples, right? And the last example I'll give, there are some server parameters that are very risky in the sense like it can destabilize that. Now, I'm not suggesting there are Einsteins out there who know each of these things, what the thing is, right? We will not let that, because in our case, the goal is we want to democratize the Postgres. Like my mom and pop can run it, right, without worrying about what is this, right? It's just storing data. So those are some of the things, yeah.
No,
Yeah,
you
so I
put
mean,
very right, Sunil. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds very similar at the end of the day, the story we have with SQL Server, which is your first choice should always be the managed services until you find something you can't do that you have a business need
That's right.
for it. Right.
Yeah.
And our goal is to make sure that that list is really, really small. It's
That's
never
right.
going to be zero, but
That's
it's sort of the exception rather than the rule. Yeah, no, that's great. I think I'll have to confess, as much as I learned about, Postgres and Flexible Server over the last year or so, working with a couple customers, I learn things all the time when I have these conversations. So, Sunil, Prabhat, I appreciate you guys coming on. Any last sort of messages, or comments for the audience that you want to leave them with, or besides just come use it?
I'll say go spin and try Flexible Server. You will be surprised and amazed, and we'll innovate on a monthly cadence, And migration is my big bet, which my team is investing right now, and will make seamless migration capability available for our customers.
Awesome. So when your overall consumption triples in the next 2 weeks, we want to cut. Is always, that's all we're asking for.
We can have a coffee or a beer, whatever works for you, Evan.
Yeah, we will give you free Flexible Server for 6 months. How's that?
That works. I'm okay with that. That's good. Okay, cool.
Is there,
awesome. Well, guys.
I want to
sorry.
ask, just on that, is there a good starting price point for someone to go and kick the tires? I guess that's like,
So $15 is fine. Sunil,
yeah, so let me add this. Like suppose you want to, you're like a cheap guy in the sense you don't want to spend any money. We have a free tier.
Oh.
So you can
even
get
better,
up to 12,
even better,
right? Even better, right? And as Prabhat is pointing out, I was just looking before this talk. You can provision the burstable SKU, the lowest end, $12 compute and $3 storage. That comes to $15 that Prabhat is talking about, right? We're talking 50 cents a day. Like if you go to Starbucks, you are paying $5, right? So what I'm saying is, one coffee, 10 days worth of database. I mean,
and you get a managed service, you get backups, you get all of those things.
Yeah,
you sold me on it. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, great. Well, thanks guys for coming. We'll work
Sure.
with you guys to get some some links and stuff out on the site when we post it, and we'll have this out for the audience pretty soon. Thanks, y'all.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank
Bye, guys.
you.